want to welcome all of you to the April 4th meeting of the Barnstable County Commissioners, and I would invite you to join us in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And also please join us in a moment of silence for all those who serve our country both here and abroad, and especially for those who have given their lives for us. Thank you. Okay, is there any public comment on any issues? Yes, Jerry.
I just wanted to invite you to a forum on the climate change that the league is doing in April 28th. Again, Saturday.
Saturday, April 28th.
Great, thank you.
So I
Very
think
good.
it'll be a most interesting program.
I would think.
Thank you, Jerry.
You have some
Good.
very good speakers. Saturday, April 28th from 10 to noon at the Harwich Community Center. Or anyone here who is interested. That would be, I'm sure that would
There is
be.
the head of Wood Pole, along with Paul
Great.
and from the National Seashore, to talk about how vulnerable our Cape is with the kind of weather we've been having and can look forward to.
Very good.
Excellent.
Well, we certainly appreciate all the good work that the League of Women Voters does for
Thank
Cape
you
Cod.
very much.
You really keep the important issues right in front of us where they need to be, and so that we never forget them and that we consider them when we make policy and when we make decisions, and also the fact that they're educational and they keep us abreast of things we need to know when policy is being made. So we
Our
appreciate
purpose really is public education. We do take decisions based on consensus. Even so, we want everybody to know all the facts and make up their own lives. So thank you, appreciate that.
Anyone else who would care to speak on a public comment? Well, good morning, everyone. It's nice to see you again. It's like we have this group of people that come each week, and it's kind of nice. And today we are going to take up one of the probably more contentious recommendations from the Special Commission, and that is the issue of governance. I do want to say, though, before we start, that there have been some questions asked about how this commission was actually set up. And this came about from two groups of people, two strong groups of people, the League of Women Voters of Cape Cod and the Business Roundtable, who over the months and months really met with the commissioners, sometimes as a group and sometimes individually, to encourage us to really take a look at how government works on Cape Cod. And I think that was really the impetus for us to figure out what might be the best way to do this. And so we spoke with Henri Rauschenbach and Rob O'Leary as former state senators and said they would be two good people to chair such a group. And we asked them to look for members, look for people that they thought would work well together. People who had a good history of Cape Cod, who were active on Cape Cod, who were either in agencies or organizations, or who actually had worked in government at some level. And so he put together this great group of people with various strengths and experiences. And they gave us a list of each of those individuals and said, what do you think of this group? And we said, we think it's a great group. So we did not officially appoint them. We concurred with the outreach that both Henri and Rob had done in terms of bringing this group together. So that's how it all started. And I just wanted to make it clear, because sometimes people think we appointed them. And that has a lot of pitfalls, as you might know, when you appoint your own people. That doesn't always work well. And so we wanted it to be the group that the co-chairs thought that they would bring the most to the process.
Let me add one thing, since I was chair at that time, that when we formally voted to approve the charge, the charge was very clear on what our expectations were of the group that had been recruited by Rob and by Henri, so that when they came with the report, if we were to say that's not what we asked for, at least they had some evidence of what we were asking for. So with that, so I think that since it was not intended to be a committee with authority to, let's say, to act, to, let's say, to do, let's say, of their own authority, they were making a recommendation, and I think that we all would agree that that would be the easiest way to do it.
Okay, so I thought in terms of how this discussion might go today, is that we could maybe separate the recommendation regarding the county commissioners and the recommendation regarding the Assembly of Delegates. And I thought we should start with the recommendation related to county commissioners is that there be 5 county commissioners elected from districts and 2 elected at large. Tying into that is that the executive functions of the county, most of the executive functions of the county, would sit within the job description of a county executive. And so the county commissioners would not have the same executive authorities we have today, which are very broad and very specific. They're broad and specific at the same time. Sometimes they're detailed within the organization that may or may not make sense. So I thought what we could do is start with the recommendation on the county commissioners and have the discussion in 2 areas. The first being, what is good about the present system? You know, what good things happen because of this structure? And then what are the issues with it? What are some of the problems? What are some of the things that don't work very well or that impede the work of county government because of the current structure? So I think we have pretty much agreed that we support the recommendation of 5 commissioners.
Excuse me.
You don't?
I have something to say about it.
Okay. Well,
Can I maybe, just before we get to
Sure.
that, I just want to give some background.
Okay.
Maybe not everybody's sort of familiar with where we are now and how we got to this structure. So go back before the existing charter, before 1988, when this charter came in. Counties in Massachusetts were governed by really 2 statutes, Mass General Law, Chapter 34 and 35, and I get mixed up as to which one is which. One of them sort of has to do with finance, the other has to do with county commissioners. And that statute, going way back in time, I couldn't even tell you how far back, but probably into the 17th or 18th century, vests all of the power with the county commissioners, typically 3 county commissioners. And so when time went on and the sort of our founding fathers back in the 80s decided to do a regional government, Cape Cod regional government in Barnstable County, they decided to sort of continue that model with the 3 strong county commissioners who hold the executive power, and they put in place a legislative body that really dealt with the budget and some other specific legislative tasks that are in the charter, the Assembly of Delegates. And so that's how this sort of model came about. So it did sort of mirror what had traditionally been county government in Massachusetts, and that's a strong executive 3 county commission.
Mm-hmm. And that's what we have today, a strong executive 3 county commissioners. So Bill, you said you wanted to make some comments?
Yes, I did, because one of the reasons it was given by the special commission was that the way, in the process of getting business done by the Assembly, that the Assembly had been, let's say, suggested to be an impediment to that process. And my concern is this, that I've been doing this for about 14 years now. And in that time, the Assembly of Delegates has only not supported the budget once, and even at that time, we had votes to support the override of the disapproval. So if we were to say that, that the replacement that's being suggested would make things smoother, then I think that we have to deal with the experience that we've seen. There's other things that I'm very concerned with as we go forward, and that is that if this is being done to reduce the cost of government, then I think that we need to know what it would cost.
I thought it would be more helpful if we started with what's good about what we're doing now, before we get to the change. I think you have to...
Well, and I think I brought that up. Right now, in the political structure that we have, there seems to be an adequate check. The Assembly of Delegates was originally formed to provide
I'm trying to frame the discussion. I think, now you can disagree with me if you want, but I was thinking it would work better if we define the first part of our discussion only to the county commissioners, and the fact that there is strong executive powers with us, not the Assembly of Delegates yet, because that's a different issue. But to look at what our roles are as county commissioners, as strong executives, the fact that we have, there are three of us, and we actually are elected by all of the citizens on Cape Cod. So we have a very broad, large constituency that three people really have to meet and are expected to meet. And it's not that I don't like it, I like it a lot, but is it really working? So that's what I thought we need to discuss. What's good about what we have now, and what doesn't work as well, and how would this recommendation help us be more responsive to the constituency on the Cape by having, 5 elected by district and 2 at large, by having districts where you could really be responsible for a district, really communicate well. So I'm thinking what's good about what we have now, and what would make it better if we went to the new model that's being proposed for the county commissioners.
Okay, for the county commissioners.
Just for the county commissioners.
Okay. I found that when I ran for county commissioner across the county, in the first time that I ran, that I found that in the process of getting visibility for my candidacy, it forced me to find out an awful lot about what was going on in other parts of the Cape, both from the point of view of, since I came from Harwich, to find out more about what was going on in the Lower Cape, and finding out what was going on in the Mid and the Upper Cape. And in that education, if you will, it made me more aware of issues that were similar in all parts of the Cape. Now, having said that, I'd always believed that the process of recruiting somebody to run for county commissioner meant that you had to have someone that could spend the time that it takes to do the job. And if you're running across the county, there is the investment of time, energy, and treasure to do that. So that, in principle, the idea of having 5 districts of county commissioners as the executive is one that has a certain amount of appeal to me. So if you were to take the recommendation that was made by the special commission and just said that we were going to expand the executive branch from 3 to 5, I think that that has a lot of merit. And the merit, in my mind, would be that you would be representing a district. You would have to get, let's say, support from 2 other districts in order to move something forward for the community. I found that, mentioning my service on the Assembly of Delegates, I found that I believe, and I was guided by my fellow members, especially when I see a person that served, Mary Lieutenant and I served on a committee together, and I found that while we both were concerned about regional issues, we're also concerned that what effect would it have on the town that we represented. But the first thought that we had was, are we doing something that, let's say, that supports regional issues? So the idea of an executive that, that support, that was from a district, doesn't mean it would be parochial in a district. I think it would inform the democratic process of giving someone who could give strong representation to the area, which I think was part of what I heard from the special commission, was that they felt that that would inform the the representation. Now, doing that would be a change that would help, I think, interest people in running for the executive branch. And I think that by doing that, I think that would in effect answer the questions, that had been raised about whether or not people were represented. Because if you, and this goes back to when the first elected position that I had, I was elected as a cemetery commissioner, and I made some proposals that the selectmen didn't like, and the charter was changed so that my job wasn't an elected job anymore. And when I asked for reappointment or an appointment as a cemetery commissioner, they didn't appoint me, but I would have been reelected. So they were streamlining their process with regard to running the operation, but I don't think it served people well. And as a matter of fact, if they had appointed me, I probably would have stayed there, and you wouldn't see me.
So if we change the charter so that you can't run again, that's a strength? Should we put that?
Absolutely. And I'm sure that many would welcome that. But anyway, but getting back to the point, if this is about the balance between a check, let's say an executive that is able to meet and perhaps have a little discussion, a little lobbying, if you will, about issues, I think you could do that with a 5-member, among 2 people.
But this is a 7-member.
Well, no,
Total 7 members.
Okay, well, I don't like that.
You don't like the
I
7?
don't like that. I
I
like the
figured
5
that
and
you didn't
second.
like the 7.
Okay, all right, I just,
You like the 5 with in
districts.
5 districts.
right, okay. That-
Okay.
But as an executive,
Mhm.
okay, they're proposing as a
Now, when you say
accommodation.
executive, that would have to be defined, because because many of the executive functions that are being proposed would transfer to the county executive. There would be executive functions for the commissioners, but they would be slightly different from what they are
It's
now.
really policy making.
It's more policy
legislative,
making, and
yeah.
some executive functions, and then the legislative functions as well.
When I've served on private sector boards, the board of directors sets policy and appoints a chief operating officer. And in that appointment, the chief operating officer has the responsibility of, say, delivering the policy of the board. In other
Well,
words,
similar to towns,
Yeah.
municipalities,
yeah,
it's pretty much
and
that
I
way.
think that that has been a good model. It allows for, let's say, for a professional to be hired to do things. At the same time, I thought it had a lot of merit in some of the. I gave you the copy of what other counties had done, the case studies, and in that case study, they all seem to revolve around the need for a strong executive, and in many cases, it was a unique executive. They seem to lean towards an elected rather than appointed, and they spoke about someone needing to be a spokesperson. I feel, for example, when we changed the paradigm over the Cape Cod Commission from regulations supported by planning to planning supported by regulation, that Paul, in what he did, became the spokesperson for the Cape Cod Commission, and I think to the benefit not only of the Cape Cod Commission, but also to our benefit, because he was spending his time as the face of the Cape Cod Commission, rather than having a regulatory body that, that people approach without having a person that could be identified as representing them. So I think there's some merit in having someone who is a spokesperson, but that can be an appointed person.
Well, if I can
Go ahead,
just
sure.
pick up there, I mean, he is an appointed person, and I think that that's what gives him the ability to be able to go out and be a spokesperson and to set a vision that is a long-term vision, not one that's based on electoral years. So I think that having, first of all, this really became clear to me when Charlie Sumner sort of went over the history of the boards of selectmen. They were all full-time selectmen positions with a not an executive power person that managed the day-to-day operations. They changed to a more professional model so that the towns could function on a day-to-day basis with the person in charge to be able to handle those functions, and their now policy and review of that budget. That allows the towns to be able to really look into what their needs are and to be a little bit more agile on a day-to-day basis. I believe that we're using the word executive an executive authority, giving it to a executive, I forget what the word is, but administrator. But I think that it really is a county manager is what that position is. And so that manager would have the executive day-to-day authority to be able to address those issues. As it stands now, Mark has some of our authority so that he can do that on a daily basis. But when it comes to the big things and the big decisions, it's very slow and it's very arduous because we're here once a week. And that's when those decisions are made. I mean, we do a lot of things during the week, but the decisions are made once a week at best. And a lot of times they're put off a week, 2 weeks. Things can take a lot longer that could happen much more quickly. The thing I liked about being a county commissioner that had to run a county race is that it taught me, as you say, about the 15 towns we're going to represent. I would have to really take a look at the two, not meet the 50, go into those 15 towns. I did, I know that everyone here did. And it just does make you aware that there are differences and similarities. And it helps you see where are those regional issues that we can bring together and what are really town-centric. So there is a benefit to the county-wide race. However, it is exhausting. You don't have a lot of, you don't have, it's not as though you're even meeting a salary to make all of that, to help you benefit from that you would even if you were a representative. So, and you have a much bigger district. So it is very time-consuming, it's very exhausting, it's very enlightening and educational, but there is that part of it. So if you had 5 districts, how would you handle those 2 at large? How would that differ for them? I kind of like the 2 at large because those 2 at large would have that regional view to keep the 5 districts regional and not become districts unto themselves like a town could become a district, a town-centric. So that would have to be worked out how that would play out, and I'm not sure how that would go. I do think that we have a budget that's about 24, we have evolved, so the county really sort of addressed human service needs, education needs, the needs that were through the cooperative extension, the regulatory part of it came on, and that might have been too heavy for many years and not really have found its right footing. I think it has now in the last 4 or 5 years. But the other towns really did do sort of, they were like help desks on different areas to the towns when they needed it, but you really weren't, they're sort of like their own nice departments to have, but there isn't a pulled together vision of the county. Where are we going? So, and then you have the Assembly of Delegates, and that grew out, that wasn't part of the original county structure, that came a year or 2 later, and that was when the board, that was then all made of professional, full-time selectmen, did not have the time to come and review the budget, be the sounding board of the 3 commissioners. Now that has changed. Our budget has grown, it was probably much smaller when you first started, so it's grown to 24 million.
Yeah.
But 24 million is still one of the smallest budgets on the Cape, if you want to put it to and yet we have 18 people reviewing and trying to control some of that money. I think that's a lot for what it is. And I think it's, and then in the board, and I will talk about the Assembly of Delegates a little bit, those towns are weighted, I mean, when you represent a
Let's hold off
geography.
on the assembly.
Okay, all right.
And take that up.
All right, but so my feeling is by collapsing the 2 makes a lot of sense because it's more focused, it's more professional. People, they're saying to increase some of the salary. I don't think this is about cost, it's about efficiency and professional services. And if you have a professional team that is on the job every day looking at the specifics that they have to, you can see what is happening even now. Times are changing. There are lots of big issues that we have to come together on. You need that appointed person that is a visionary but also skilled enough to be able to handle those things and to be able to understand how you by combining regional requests. It's all about cooperation. Today's government isn't just the town of Wellfleet is going to go and take on this initiative and we can go up to the State House and lobby for these things, you know, that's not gonna, we're gonna have very little SWAT if we, in comparison to combining that voice with 15 or 14 other voices, or 8 other voices. And so I think that level of cooperation is now being built into the government as it stands. That is how you garner resources. That is how we got the last grant that just came in for $500,000, because it was a regional effort. It was 14 towns signed up for this. The county sponsored it with the town of Yarmouth. And that is how we're going to bring more money in. So I don't think the cost is something that we have to be thinking of, because I think if you're going in this way, more money will be able to be effectually come into the county and help us with those things. So to me, it just makes a lot of sense. I think having that type of professional operation gives more of an agility and flexibility to the county to address on a day-to-day basis those issues that come up, and they can handle them on the spot as opposed to putting them off for a long time. We're the only board that's left that isn't gone to a professional model where all others have, and I think it's time for us to join the 21st century and look at what we have ahead of us. It's not the same as it was.
I would
Well,
think that-
and I just wanted to add my 2 pieces and then we can discuss.
Oh, yeah,
My
that's what you have an
sixpence. I'm thinking really about the idea of 5 or 7 commissioners. And one thing I think that is helpful to the voters is if we have the other 2, is that a voter can actually elect their sense of a majority. Because they would vote, if you were voting in a district, you would vote 1, but you could also vote, so you don't actually vote the majority, but you get to vote for 3. And I think that's good. That gives the voters a little more input into who the commissioners are. But in terms of, I'm thinking it in terms of how do we get the work done? And if you look at what we do now, we meet once a week. We're not here full time. And we deal with a lot of detail, but we're not engaged as much in the detail. I think what we find ourselves doing is creating our own work based on our own interests and based on the liaison assignments that we have. Like I'm with Children's Cove and you're with the Arts Foundation. Bill has the Compact and CVEC and
I
other.
don't have CVEC.
No, you don't have CVEC. So it's like we have these liaison assignments, but what do we do with it at the end? So I think the major issue that we really have is the challenge of communication. The challenge of communication just among us, among the staff here, and also among the community. Because when we communicate, we're pretty much communicating a lot of times our own opinions on things or our own interests in things, as opposed to these are the defined interests of the county. These are our goals, these are our objectives, and each of us are carrying these out in our own districts. We all know what we're doing, we all have a planned effort. Right now, it's kind of, if that's your liaison responsibility, you kind of do it however you want, but the people that you engage in on that liaison could come from all parts of the Cape. I think the other thing that happens if you have 5 commissioners who are policymakers and not executives is that you actually set up an organization where each commissioner is responsible for specific functions in the county. And when you're responsible for, well, let's say, let me think of one. All of a sudden I can't even think of one. Well, let's say it's the human services. That's one of your areas of responsibility. So you have to work with different people in order to accomplish that. But you're like the convener, because that's your responsibility as a commissioner. You convene your meetings, you run your meetings, you present budgets if there are budget requirements. You present budgets to the full commission, because the commission would be working on those budgets and putting them together, as opposed to necessarily delegating all of the budget work say to the manager, I think it really helps if you go online and look at counties around the country and read about their organizations and how they're set up and how each commissioner has specific responsibilities. And the fact that it's not once a week, you have to be there. I mean, you may meet once a week, but you have certain responsibilities every day of the week that you have to attend to, whatever those may be and however we would define those. So it isn't like you kind of make up your own work. It's very well defined as part of the organization in the county. And then if you're representing the districts, you can go back to those districts and they blur the town lines. Obviously they will. There will be more than one town. So you establish your own relationship with the people in the districts and with their specific needs and what you bring back to them, in essence, and what you bring back from your district to the full board of commissioners. I think it really helps define the lines of communication. I think the needs of the district will be more understood. I think they will be more clear. And then when we sit together, when the commissioners sit together to advance those interests of the districts, we know exactly what we're doing because we're all doing the same things in our own district.
Can I add on to
Yeah.
that? You're hitting on a good point, and it's communication, and it's what your role is. And if there are 5 districts, those districts are the districts of that are now representing a coalition of towns. And how is that representative, that one representative, going to relate the mission of the county? Because you are part of the vision of the county. So how do you bring that vision to those 5 towns and help them see where the benefits and what they may feel are detriments? You can then bring that back to the other 4 districts that you're working with and say, this is the pros and the cons from what I'm being able to bring together. As it stands now, there is, and I think Mary Lou and I have always agreed on this, there's a tendency by town, you keep going back to your town border and boundary and feeling like you're there to represent your town, but it's really, you are a county official who is to be representing the county stand to the town. And how does that, and try to be able to relate that vision. Right now, there really isn't that vision. There's, as I say, there's a nice set of very, very well-run departments, but are they unified in a vision, and is there a real clear course for the county to go forward on? So that is where that communication and those lines may be better, because you now are coming from the county to those 5 towns and working with them to coalesce them and to bring them into where the regional services will benefit them, what regional efforts will benefit, maybe even those, there's some towns, if they were Outer Cape representatives, there's needs there that could be the confederation of those towns going forward with a regional effort, or it could be part of the overall regional effort. But then there will be much more clearly defined types of conversations. And that whole thing about being assigned to your interests might be, change. I mean, those are the details that get worked out, that devil in the details.
But when we were talking too about, last week, we talked about the reporting requirements, with the wastewater. And that we're going to have each of us with the responsibilities that we've agreed to last week are going to be responsible on a quarterly basis for reporting on these. And that could begin the more of the consolidation of our thinking around, if we had 5 commissioners with districts, how effective that could be, that kind of communication, and having each commissioner, like for instance, take responsibility for transportation, like you are, because you're already on the RTA board.
And that's a real regional board.
Actually, the only connection that the county has with transportation is through the Cape Cod Commission and a transportation committee over there, plus the money that the Cape Cod Commission gets from both the federal and state to provide planning support for public transportation as well as participation in the Metropolitan Planning Organization. And I serve as your representative on the MPO, but we do not have a county representative on the RTA. And the reason is that the towns are given money off of their cherry sheet, and that's how that representation comes.
See,
But I think that going forward, we would benefit from having a county presence on the RTA that was less tenuous than the one that you have now.
Well, and you know, and that's the other piece of this. You look at all these different commissions and agencies and organizations and whatever you want to call them that are separately working on all these things, and yet how do we bring them all together? And I think when you have...
Make a suggestion to you that when we create...
Well, I'm not asking the question now, I'm just saying, because I don't think we want to get too detailed today. I think we want to think overall about the idea of 5 and 2 commissioners and how a county structure with 5 or 2 commissioners.
Although I would caution, maybe you shouldn't wed yourself to 5 and 2. You sort of, that's sort of
That's
the devil
right.
in the detail.
I'm not wedding us to
It
that.
might be a 4 and 3, or you sort of have to look at how the district.
Yeah, and I would sort of have the understanding of how, I mean, I know people who've lived in counties that have an at-large and then the districts. I really have to have an understanding of the benefit of both of those boards to wed myself to one way or the other. But the fact of collapsing the 2 boards is appealing to me. I think it's much more efficient, and I think it would have a much more regional voice. And the one thing I will say about the Board of Commissioners that I think is not good is that a board of 3 does not allow discussion outside that will be in compliance with open meeting law. If you really want to have a conversation, you can have a conversation when there's 5 and say, this is how I feel about things, this is what I think.
You can have a conversation with
2
one.
people.
Yeah, I mean, with one person, and you can have that with, the other 4 people, and you can come to a consensus, and those people talk to each other, so everybody sort of knows what page they're on, whereas we're sometimes, we sort of know where we're going or what we want, but to really be able to state our feelings and to be able to, it's a little
It's
hard to
conversation.
do.
You guys
And
can't
it's
have a
also,
conversation without
and
open meeting
you
law.
can also feel like there's always like 2 against 1. If there isn't an agreement, and whoever's that left out person on that idea will say, oh, that's, so it's just not, it doesn't create good interrelationships.
Yeah.
But
The open.
without getting into too much detail, I would like to remind you that when we set a budget over there, we are setting a policy, and that policy is informed by the liaisons that we have with the different committees. So that when people come, when our department managers come before us to talk about those projects that they're interested in, we are already aware of what their interest is, because we've been participating as a liaison in the general way of their activities. So from that point of view, I believe that is already going on, and that expanding the board from 3 to 5 would not change that. But I think that the idea of this area of interest, if you were to suggest that there'd be a more clearly defined, area of activity, and say, okay, that not only are you a liaison, but you're also responsible
You have a
for
job to do.
creating the budget. Now, I had budget creation responsibility when I'd worked in private industry, when I worked at the utility company, and that was during. I had a lot of sympathy for Mark, because in the 4 months that you have to go through the budget, and create it, there's a lot of energy and time that goes into it, and it's not just a part-time job, it's an 8-hour job, and you have your other responsibilities to take care of at the same time. So the idea of, let's say, giving separate budget creation responsibility to the commissioners has some appeal, because you're going to delegate most of the scut work to the people, to the department manager. But I think it basically would allow you to come and, let's say, and advocate for that part of the budget, because I see that when it goes over to the assembly, that they do spend some time in trying to, let's say, to advocate for a particular position. I know that when Mary Lou and I were doing housing, for example, we were essentially doing that. We try to become more informed with what the department was doing.
Well, you bring back from your district what those regional needs are in your district in terms of funding. And then you work together to try to sort it out. The,
Do you want to ask if anybody has
Yes,
any opinion
but
on the commission?
yes, I do.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
no, that's okay. But I wanted to have everybody get the benefit of this discussion. Because because what I'm concerned about are two things: communication and making this government work for the people and for the people who are functioning in the government. I think, and make it work for the people on Cape Cod. I mean, it really has to begin to work. And there are roadblocks right now to making that happen. I mean, we're here one day a week, and what we do outside of that is either by invitation or because we invited ourselves somewhere or we asked to meet with people, but there's no real coordination of what happens outside of a Wednesday. And I think that is really needed. So maybe those of you who are here might have some comments on the discussion or about the recommendation?
Can I just jump in for a second?
Yeah, sure.
I know you don't mean to say that it doesn't work now.
No?
No.
I think what we have works. It can always work better.
Exactly.
Exactly.
And particularly in the area of communication and organization. Not what we're doing, that's why I'm saying, what's good about today.
Right.
That things get done and the regional efforts are moving along, but can it work better?
Yes, and could have
Which was the
happened
whole
faster.
idea of the recommendation. Any comments?
I have to say, it's kind of hard to talk about a board of five without recognizing that there's an assembly of delegates out there. So if you're talking about a board of five, you're actually improving.
I'll have a couple of comments. I'll start if you don't
Okay.
mind. Going back to sort of the strengths and weaknesses of the three, I think sort of the prohibition on two commissioners being from the same town has been effective.
Yes.
It sort of has spread out the representation to some extent. I think we've had concentrations on one or two boards, but in general, it sort of spreads out. So I think that's been very effective. I think also being at large, as we talked about, I have always seen commissioners, this board included, and as far as I can remember, all the previous boards I've worked with, really bring a broader perspective to this table, not just their town's perspective. And I think that's always been a strength for the commissioners. And sort of going to the assembly a little bit, I've been, especially during the times when we had money, I felt that the town-specific representation of the assembly was a weakness. It sort of prohibited maybe a broader perspective on getting things done more on a regional basis. But, you know, you have to sort of gauge these things a little bit, and what are you giving up? And sort of our history has been, when we first did the charter, that the towns were our clients. It was sort of specific that the towns were our clients. And we didn't really have a citizen client base at all. That's evolved a little bit more now. We certainly have more interaction directly with the citizenry, both through human services, both through the health department, both through cooperative extension and the programs that they're doing. So that's changed over time. And I think sort of thinking about how you're changing the government visions that difference, so that you have a more direct contact with the citizenry. But, you know, having said that, you have to be careful about what you're giving up. And right now, with the assembly, you're sort of engaged with the towns. They sort of have a direct stake in the matter to some extent. And once you give that up and go to the districts, that's sort of the danger. You sort of have to preserve the engagement with the town, and it has to be done through the executive more. That's sort of the piece that you need to make sure you preserve.
I've done some, let's say, anecdotal surveying among people that I've run into, and it's been universal that they like the idea of having their town represented, their town represented in some way. Not a district, but the town. In Harwich, I like the idea that somebody from Harwich is serving at the county, because I feel that the town of Harwich has some visibility that they would not have if it was in a district. I think that they're, you know, these are basically quotes. I think that if you were to make a change and Howard was not represented, then, what happens to Howard? And I hear the same thing from somebody from Eastham, somebody from, of course, from Barnstable. So these are what I call anecdotal comments from people that I didn't cue and say, you wouldn't like this idea, would you? But just a sort of a spontaneous response. And I don't think we can discount that, because as we move forward and as we talk about acting for the benefit of people, there are not enough people that have spoken to me spontaneously that say that they're in favor of giving up any type of a franchise.
Did any of them say that what direct benefit they thought they received because they had a specific person representing them?
But
Or
the
was it just
university-
the idea of it?
It was the idea of it, because none of them that talked to me could give me any clear idea of what the county commissions were, what the Cape Cod Commission was, or what the assembly
Exactly.
was.
So no
So
clear
there's the
benefit,
answer
just
to
the
that.
idea.
And they don't even know who their delegate is in a lot of towns. I mean, most people don't
But
even
you
know
may
who
be
there is.
able to accomplish that, Bill, with other things, like they don't talk about a finance.
Could I also ask
There's
a
a-
question?
Wait a
there's
minute,
marketing.
one at a time.
There is a marketing issue, okay? If you have to sell a concept and then sell a product or a service that fits the concept, you have a double problem here. Because if we don't have enough visibility for what the county is now, we're basically selling a change in something that nobody gets to begin with. So,
Well-
and both advantages and disadvantages.
And maybe they will get it if you change it. And the other point is, I don't feel as though I'm not represented because I don't have my own state representative. I feel that my town is represented very well by the state representative I have, and she is representing 8 other towns as well. So to be able to say that I have to have someone directly from my town speak with that town voice, when the majority of people do not know who that person is or what they're doing. And there are some delegates that report to their boards of selectmen and get on the same page with them often. There are many who do not. So that is kind of a misunderstanding of what, it's just your gut reaction, I want my town.
That's sort of like asking, do you like mom and apple pie?
Yeah, do I like mom and apple pie? Yeah, I like my, and do you like your own
What's the
home?
alternative?
So, yeah, so
Very
as you say, these people are speaking from a point of reference that they're not even understanding, and I feel very well represented in the
But
state government.
when you think about it, it's like 2 organizations. You have one side of the organization that has broad representation of a number of towns. And then you have another organization that has individual representation from the towns. And I think the thing is, what are the benefits to that? What are the benefits to the citizens, I guess I want to say, is what are the real benefits to that? I don't know. I mean,
And that's another
we'd have to
question.
stop and think about that.
Do we, as commissioners, we are not elected by the towns. We're elected by the population. So are we here to represent towns? Are our interaction based on geographies totally, by boundaries that were created by man? Or do we really look at where are the regional issues that we can take care of? And we have big umbrella issues that, as a strong county, we could really tackle. You could have, serious and effective energy policy that is united and unified for the region, so that there isn't there isn't a lot of energy being developed in one area or not in another. That there is an overall goal for the region. What can that look like? How can we attain that goal? There is the wastewater issues. How are we going to bring that voice together? How are we going to bring economic development issues and revitalization of the village places and the redevelopment of these, so that they're much more friendly, and yet we're protecting, we're concentrating density and protecting what lands we have. So there's big issues that way, and I think that some of the question is, do we represent towns? We are elected by all of the people, not just the towns. So there is, that is the role of county government. It's not to be the town-centric, it's to be the vision of the region and bringing those towns in. And I think that by having 5 districts, you are as well represented by a person who is actively involved in all of those towns, and it can actually see the unification of those and bring it forward into the other
I
5.
want to say it a little differently too. I think that requirement that 2 commissioners cannot be elected from the same town, obviously is very good.
Right, and I think
But what I see is that because for this time around, I'm from the Upper Cape, you're from the Lower Cape, and you're sort of
in the middle.
kind of close to
Yeah,
the
no, it
middle.
actually has a balance.
That it's a great balance, and it just is happenstance that it happened this way. But I think for the 3 of us, what we bring is more of an understanding of the region, your region, my region, and yours. And this is good, because if we're making policy, and we're looking at how a policy may affect all of Cape Cod, you bring that understanding because you live there, and I live where and so do you. So this makes for a really good balance in policy setting, which is why if you look to what are the good things about having 5 commissioners from a district, they're going to bring that same understanding of that area of the Cape to the discussion and the debate, which you can't rely on that happening.
Right.
All you can
was an
rely on,
arbitrary
you
election,
could have 3 commissioners from
but it has.
Wellfleet, Provincetown, and Eastham.
That's
I
probably
mean,
not likely, but
not
we could
likely,
have
but it
more
could happen.
Yarmouth
Yeah.
than Falmouth, that would be
Falmouth,
better.
Or Barnstable, Yarmouth.
No, sorry,
yeah,
Barnstable, Yarmouth.
Barnstable, right, and that's not gonna really help either end of the Cape,
No,
because
so-
they're really sort of.
So
they're-
it doesn't really allow for that
And that's where,
regional.
that's where the
And I
district.
think we did have, I'm
experience.
trying to remember, Bourne, Sandwich, Falmouth at one point, Bourne, Sandwich, and Mashpee.
Well, that's why the other Cape number.
No,
was that there was a
Sandwich,
county government.
Falmouth, and,
Where you had
yeah,
Falmouth.
Falmouth,
But
Sandwich,
we had
and
John
Mashpee.
Stone at one
Yeah,
point.
yeah, no, from Chatham, but he's still, then Chatham's sort of
Yeah.
over there.
That's
Yeah,
right.
they don't-
Well, anyway,
And we had,
we don't want to go there. But that's really a downside
Right.
to the current situation.
Absolutely.
And it's happened before.
Right,
We were just
right.
saying that,
Yeah.
Bourne, Falmouth, and
I think it was Bourne, Sandwich, and Mashpee. maybe?
Mashpee, yeah, something like that.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, but as we go into this, remember that when we put together a budget and the budget gets passed, regardless of where the origin of the past county commissioners have been, it has always ended up with the check and balance that we have in having a regional focus. And I think that, one of the things we're going to be doing this afternoon, for example, is we're going to go over and we're going to talk about to get some support from committee to support our idea of a regional program that we think would be very helpful in sort of pushing that whole regional services. And I want to say that in addition to the regional services that we're doing, to coordinate, to have somebody, as we talked about today, have somebody that every day comes in and says, this is what I'm going to be thinking about today, these are the things that I'm going to go forward with. The idea of having part-time commissioners, or
Because
selectmen.
they're still part-time.
I remember when they were full-time professional selectmen, and they would wait for one of the people to go out of the room, and they would basically sort of gang up on them, and they would do things. So that wasn't really
No.
an effective way of running things. The professional manager, operating to implement the policy that was created by, by the budget, because the budget is the policy statement. You've decided to spend your money to do certain things, and that creates a policy. And I think that we are doing that now. I do think, though, that the 2 things. The 3 of us do not have what I would call full-time employment. Okay, I'm retired, basically, so I have the time to put in to be a county commissioner. Although you're a selectman in Falmouth, and God knows you're going to see your 3rd night tonight, with that. Good luck with that. And as far as I know, you're not fully employed. How would somebody do the things you're talking about for the money that they're talking about?
Exactly.
If you're intending to have them, be of an age where they may have responsibility for children unless they're enormously wealthy or independent in that way. How would we attract people that we want to be representative of the community that we serve, and yet we are expecting that they somehow will be able to support themselves and still do the job?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, the county commissioners have been viewed for a long time as, and although they have stood for many good things and gotten things through, sort of ceremonial figures. We're sort of like that ceremonial mayor of a town, you know, like the mayor of Cambridge, but there is, and that person was elected, but never really the visionary. To have somebody a visionary, you have to have them be able to be in place without fear of having to face a re-election and have a 10-year vision down the road. And how am I going to get there? I mean, some of the best managers we have on the Cape have been in their seats for 25 plus years. And they have been able to keep those towns going forward with a vision in the change of the times and adapted the town, and have also guided the selectmen in what those are, having enough knowledge to be able to say, this is something I think we could do, we should do. Those selectmen bring that back and then it goes forward. So I think that that is a much more efficient way of doing things, as opposed to being more of a hindrance to a person who because you don't have all of the executive power, you have many other different responsibilities, and then when it's time to even propose something, not only do you have 3 commissioners to get it through, but then there's 15 town representation who then revert back. So it is hard to go forward with a 10-year vision plan the way it's set up, because it's very immediate, I think.
Well, if you take any public policy course, one of the big problems is that the crisis of having short-term budget means that you have to always think immediately about the amount of money you have to operate this year. You don't have the authority to, let's say, to invest in a long-term program. You don't have the authority to, let's say, to invest in a program. Even on long-term grants, for example, you have to go back every year in order to, let's say, in order to get support for, for a grant that's more than a couple of years.
Well, yeah, I mean, and that's if that grant works, and if the grant does, I mean, that's a whole other thing, but
Nothing will change with regard to short-cycle budget mentality.
I agree with
Okay,
that, but
so
you
in that-
still have to have, even a person, you can have, and some of our department heads are doing it, we're looking 3 years down the road, I'm gonna need a truck, so I'm spacing this out. There is a way of doing that even within a budget cycle, because you are planning ahead. 10 years from now, we wanna be here, so how am I setting up this budget, our debt service, our bonding service, how are we setting up all of these things so that we can ultimately come to
Well,
that,
that's the capital
goal?
plan.
So that's a
strategic
capital
plan.
plan or a strategic plan. So I think that is deterred within the structure because of this.
Can we go back to the 2 at large
Okay.
and try to have some discussion on where we think we should go with that?
Well, I just would need more information. I don't even know what to say, but, I mean, I think
Would
I'd like to
any
have the
people
regional voice.
Want to run at large?
Well, that's what I mean. How would that campaign go for them? What would be the support for them? And,
Now, the other
Just
issue
looking
that
at-
goes to partisan piece,
We're
too.
just looking at sort of, go back to what forms a majority. So to me, the 5 and 2, 4 and 3, you get a broad representation of Cape Cod on a majority vote of the commissioners. If
Right.
you have that. So I think one of those 2 is a good
Yeah, no,
allocation.
remember, the 5 are being proposed, well, it's being proposed as nonpartisan,
mhm.
so not a Republican, Democrat. I don't know how that works out.
I think it
It's
works out
stayed on the
terrible,
ballot. What?
because right now, the Democrat and Republican Party form a base of support that you can go to, and
That's
we'll
true.
put out signs for you, and we'll, and.
Aren't you
say-
nonpartisan on your?
No.
No.
You guys are. Somebody-
Yeah,
you
they
are.
are.
We are not.
Okay, but who would, if you're running across the region, or even running in a district, you have to basically form all of the infrastructure that a party gives you in order to, in order to run. And if you don't have that infrastructure, you have to do double work in order to create that, and it only has a life of of your campaign, unless you spend a lot of time outside of your job maintaining and holding that organization together.
On the flip side, being nonpartisan, and you were going to be looking for those people who are the worker bees of their party, and that's why you have a party, so you can have that support. You can go to both. You can be invited to Republican meetings, and you can be, because you are now going to be speaking for a voice of Cape Cod and not just a party or an ideology. So you would have the benefit of being able to be exposed. Right now, during a primary season, I doubt that you were ever really invited to Democratic Town Committee meetings, nor have we ever been invited to Republican Town Committee meetings. this way you have the benefit of being invited to both. Many of the town Democratic meetings will invite the boards of selectmen and those candidates, whether they're Republican or Democrat, and everybody sort of knows where people fall, where their, their leanings are. So I think that there's almost a benefit to that, and it could also be a benefit in discussion and dialogue as opposed to being more divisive.
Although, Sheila, isn't the danger, since you're nonpartisan, there'd be no primary, so you have more on the final ballot, so you have more of a tendency to be elected with a non-majority? Is that how it would work? I'm trying to figure out how
Well,
it
we'd have
would
to
work.
discuss it with the,
So if you had 10 people
We'd have
running,
to have a lawyer here to help us.
Yeah,
well, because
exactly.
of the state ballot, well, it's partisan in the primary, but on the general election in November, you're voting for Republicans and Democrats.
You
But
could
if you were
change that to be
nonpartisan,
part of the
you
your
wouldn't have
town
a
election
primary.
cycle,
Right, maybe
which
you
is a
could.
nonpartisan
Right.
election.
Yeah, you
if
could
wanna
have it
go
a
that.
different election
Right.
cycle.
Oh,
Different election
or-
It could be on the town election cycle maybe, I don't know. But
But,
we'd have to explore that. But I think if you're going to be, if you're really going to represent all the people on Cape, well,
well, I want to talk about the,
Go ahead.
how do
the
people
two
get
at large,
represented?
how do they
well,
win an election?
In past election cycles, I've actually set up a cable program and invited both parties to come on, and they have come on. And I felt that all of us that are serving, have some need of providing an opening to people to get their message out. Now, perhaps that could be expanded into a different way when we're talking about, the county commissioners, because I don't believe in the boards that I've sat on as a county commissioner, that there's ever been what I would call a partisan bias, at this level, and the representation we've had on Cape Cod, I've never felt that people put party before people. So that,
But
to me, is a
that's
non-issue
changed.
right now.
That's change, we're fortunate in the fact that so far that it has not really impacted us, I guess you would say, but it has changed. I mean, there are some people who would not want to talk to you because
Yeah,
if you
like
said you're a
Keegan won't-
Republican.
won't talk
But
to
if
me,
you
but
are,
Delahunt
if you're a
did.
nonpartisan person, you may be able to not only learn from people you think you're going to disagree with, but they're going to learn from you that you're not just, they're not dismissing you because they'll say that person's a Republican or that person's a Democrat, so I'm just shutting off.
Yeah, you're right, it
Because-
has changed.
So it has changed.
Yeah, at least at the
Unfortunately,
congressional
partisan,
level.
people used to be much more easygoing with this and do vote for the person in the end. The one thing that I will say is, once we got through the primary, I was talking to a Republican elected official, and he said, just remember, once you get elected, you are now representing all of Cape Cod, not just, and I didn't need to hear that, but I appreciated that coming from a Republican elected official. So, I think that there's a benefit to it. It could actually be a very unifying board if it was a nonpartisan board. That's just my own feeling. And somehow we've got to start being able to talk across these lines, and it might be just the right setup to do
So
it.
let's go back to the two at large.
I'm not sure what to say.
You're not in favor of two at large? Or you have?
If we stay at, just as an executive branch, okay, and you're talking about let's say 5 districts and 5 district representatives and 2 at large, I see pros and cons, with that setup. I do know that I do not have to be reminded to think regionally because I did run at large across all 15 towns. And I know that that although I might be in favor of a particular, let's say, what happens in a particular area, because I live there, I also know that I can't really take that, that geographic bias and say that I'm truly doing the job that I was elected to do if I don't take into account what happens in Bourne or what happens in Provincetown. So the at-large, has that benefit because although you may not satisfy everybody in all 15 towns, you do have to keep in mind that you're representing everybody in all 15 towns.
Right. Okay, and if I could just say that, this is sort of our own feelings about things, not based on real concrete examples or law or that sort of thing. And I was talking to a good friend of mine who's a constitutional lawyer, but it's, the US Constitution. And they have put me in touch with a professor who heads the Department of Law at Harvard, who teaches on municipal and county governments. So I'm going to get in touch with this gentleman and see if, what is his feelings on this? Could he direct us to people that could help us, or students, or maybe he would have some comments to make on the subject. But I just think to go to some of what is the experience, what is the.
A lot of this was covered in those case studies that I gave you.
Yes, I understand that, but I mean, I'm just talking about somebody from Massachusetts with an understanding of Massachusetts law, Massachusetts, and municipalities and county governments. I mean, I'm just saying to have more of a guidance on that area. So I would rather, I mean, I like the concept. I mean, I can understand the concepts of both. I'm not equipped to say, do I prefer one above the other at this moment.
To piggyback on that idea, we have always had representation at the Commonwealth, and there have always been committees with staff that looked at county governance issues in Massachusetts. I wonder if we would be served if we found out who those people were, to find out what they had looked at, because remember, there's been several counties that have been dissolved.
Right.
And we have been able to survive because we made a case that we were actually making a significant contribution to the region.
And we're a unique region. I mean, we're different than a bunch of towns that happen to be, right in the middle of Massachusetts. I mean, we have a coastline that surrounds us, that makes us a common boundary. We have common issues because of that coastline that separate us. We're detached from the mainland, so there is many good reasons for us to have a
And we have more than just the jail to keep us going.
I'm interested in other thoughts about the two at large. Does anyone here listening to us today have any? Jerry?
I just have a question.
Sure.
Because I thought that the recommendation talked about a new body that was a merger of the
Right.
Commissioners Board and the Assembly, and it would have not so much executive, but legislative power.
Right.
And I began to wonder about where we fit in passing ordinances and holding, I think that deserves some role here.
Well,
I
that's
don't
why you
see
have to
it
talk
as
about the
an
assembly
overly
and
So I
technical
think,
body.
things.
if you don't have any comments on the two at large commissioners, then let's move to the assembly. The discussion with the assembly, the idea that these 7 commissioners, 5, I'm talking about the recommendation now, 5 by district, 2 at large, merging with the county commissioners, losing some of its executive powers, transferring some of those to the county manager or county executive, and then bringing in the current legislative powers that the assembly has, and creating that
board.
one body.
Right.
So
And
let's talk about that.
I think we've sort of said that we agree that that's a good move. I'd like to hear at this point
Well, let's talk about what's good about it first.
Well, I think we
what's
just
good about it?
discussed about what is good about the assembly.
What is good about merging the legislative functions
I
in
think
with the
that the things
commissioners?
that we just discussed right now were the benefits of merging. And what we were, we were talking about county commissioners, but
No,
Well, we did sort of.
Well, you
we sort of
alluded to the
had- we
regional-
can't avoid it,
Yeah.
Right.
when you were
You
talking
can't.
about the 7-member board.
right, because you're talking about collapsing two boards.
Well, I was focusing more on the maintaining separation as an executive branch and just expanding the membership on the executive branch. That's what I was speaking to.
Oh, you were not
Because
talking
you
about,
specifically said you did not want to bring up the assembly.
in the first discussion, I wanted to
Right.
talk about what's good about what we have now with the commissioners.
Right, and that's what, and I thought that that's what I was speaking to.
Yeah,
right.
So now we want to talk about
Okay, so Bill can. Maybe I'm
the
wrong.
proposal that includes the legislative functions.
Okay,
This is the new group being recommended, the new group of commissioners, 5 and 7, with less executive functions, because some of those are being moved to the county executive, so that a lot of what we do, we don't do, and merging the legislative functions of the assembly with the commissioners.
I would like to just make
The
an observation.
benefits of that.
You're giving your executive power to
Some
a
of
county
it.
manager. No, you would be giving all of your executive, pretty much the day-to-day, other than
Oh, the
legislative
day-to-day.
policy. So really, what we're talking about by a 5-member and 7-member board is eliminating the Board of Commissioners and reducing the size of the Assembly of Delegates and making them more representative. So I think that's, everybody's saying that it's really a change to the Assembly, but they're the legislative branch. It's really, the change is reducing that and eliminating the Board of Commissioners. I don't think we would be called a Board of Commissioners, or maybe we would be, but it wouldn't be the same, it's not an executive body any longer.
Right. You wouldn't
So-
have appointing
so there's-
power,
yeah,
you
there's
wouldn't-
none of that, right.
You would have budgetary approval power.
But
That's
budgetary
where
and policy.
Executive
And
would
policy.
develop the
Right.
budget and submit it to you,
Right.
just
Right.
like submitted there
Right.
to the Assembly.
Right.
And policy.
And I think it's, I'm in favor of that.
So what do you think, okay, so,
Yeah, I think that it's, you have to understand that you're eliminating the executive board and reducing the legislative board and giving them more of a footprint. You're expanding their responsibility, which is good for them because they're not just looking at their town, they're looking at their town with the towns that surround their town, and where is where is the policy that's going to benefit that area, as opposed to town by town.
and policymaking has some executive substance to it as
Implications.
well, yes, so.
But it's
But
really
when it comes to the
eliminating the board.
day-to-day operations, those executive functions
Right.
and the
Well, I mean,
policymaking functions.
You're really putting in executive power into a manager. I mean, that's what you have at the
It
town
really
council.
becomes sort of a
Well,
town
and-
model.
and all the
It's
towns.
it's exactly a town model.
It is,
So
it is a
And it's
town
a
model.
professional model, and it's an efficient model.
Yeah, it's a
And
town
it's a
So I
model
support
that it already
Right.
has determined to work.
Okay, I'd rather hear from other people at this point.
Well, because we have already agreed that we like the recommendation in terms of the merger
Right.
and the creation and bringing in the legislature.
I think it would make county government run
I don't
more.
think that
But
I'm
Bill
on the
doesn't
same
agree
page
with this.
With regard to, let's say, the idea of expanding the Board of Commissioners is something that I think is a useful idea to look at. And I think it's worth a conversation to discuss what the job description of a regional versus let's say, a district commissioner would be in terms of an executive role. However, in spite of what might be implied to be the high emotional content with regard to individuals who say that they like the idea of having a person that is representing their town on at a regional level, I don't think we can completely ignore that. And I bet you that if we did do what I'd call a regional survey about what people thought about what represented democratic representation versus what did not, I would suggest to you that people we would have to do a lot more than we've done so far to sell the idea that they're getting more representation rather than less. And that the other part is that we haven't figured out what basis we're going to sell this model on.
Well, we're just talking about what model.
We don't know what the model is.
We don't have a
Yeah.
model yet. We have a recommendation and we're trying to work with the recommendation that we have and looking at what we have now and is this going to make it better? So can we accept this new model? And if we do, what are the benefits of it? And then we have to build a whole, we have to define it and we have to be very specific about
Okay,
it before we even
if
take
I
it
can- if I
anywhere.
can
We
just
haven't
say-
even completely defined what this
The
model is.
legislative body of Massachusetts was much larger at one point, and it has been reduced to 168. There was 204 representatives, now it's 168. I think that everybody in Massachusetts probably is well represented. So I think that by saying it has to be by a town or even more voices up there is somewhat mute. Also, it was brought to my attention, and this is another reason I want to talk to some people about this. In 1964, there was, whether it was an amendment or a decision made about the Constitution, that you did not elect, people were not to be elected by their geography. You are elected by a population, which is what created the Senate and the populations of the Senate and the House. And the Senate is different. I understand that, but it is basically on populations, not on geographies. So I haven't fleshed all this out, but these are things to look into. for saying that I am less represented by having a district representative. I, for instance, have, and I just wanted to add this up, in Wellfleet, the delegate has 1.27% of a vote. But if you added up the votes of Provincetown, Orleans, Eastham, Truro, Wellfleet, and Brewster, it would come to 13.14%. So that is still less than what a representative's vote would be for that district. Or if you add, you could even add another town's district, because if you put 5 into 100%, you get 22.2 whatever percent. And you would actually have more representation from a district representative than you do by an individual delegate.
Yeah, basically, because it's 1 out of 5, you're 20%.
That's exactly right.
So I see what Sheila's getting at.
Oh, so
We'll
but
say
you
that
have
to the
every
people of
district
Barnstable,
has
but-
equal representation.
No, I mean, but that would be a much more fair and equitable representation
Yeah.
as opposed to how it stands now. Just because I don't live in Barnstable, I pay the same taxes, where towns are assessed, the same percentage goes in, but I don't have as much of a vote because I don't have the population. I don't think that it
Okay.
makes any sense.
Going back, we both served in the Assembly.
Mhm.
In my service in the Assembly, most of the work that was done in committee. I was chair of Economic Affairs, and there were several, in the time that I was on there, the Lower Cape had more representation in the chairs of the committees than the Upper Cape did. So that although the population was weighted towards towards the larger towns, the effective work of the Assembly was done in those committees, and it seemed to me that that worked fairly well because of because of what happened in the committee. In the state example you were given before, in the Fourth Barnstable, which we both live in, she spends an awful lot of time in Harwich to find out what those issues are, so that she can, so that in my opinion, she can clearly serve the whole district and the whole population.
That's what you were to do as a representative. So I feel
Right,
very well
but-
represented by
But at the
having a
same- But at the
representative.
same time, she will tell you that it took a long time to have people in Harwich look at her as being a representative in the Fourth Barnstable as opposed to being somebody from Provincetown. So that does require someone who is able to put full time into the job of representing, and which brings up an additional problem, in my opinion, that if you were to put a person in a district that already has a state rep, do we do this through the charter, or do we get legislative action? Because if we have to get legislative action, why would I, as a politician, want to have somebody that could be an understudy or basically run against me because they could pose that I am an incumbent in what I'm doing and I can run against your incumbency? How would you answer that?
I think that would be, if that is the representative's feeling, then it comes from total self-interest, because why not have people who are more engaged in government, who have that exercise of government, and if you don't have, say, and not everybody stays to be a state representative, they run for other things, they run for higher office. So why not have people who have experience in government, have experience with campaigning, have experience with the area that they are representing, to be able to stand up and go forward into that seat. I think that is a very weak argument not to do
When you talk to this Harvard law
districts.
professor, ask him how much of that naivete is really shared by most politicians.
Well, that's politicians, but that doesn't mean it's the right thing to do.
You create a farm team.
Yeah, I mean, I think that having more people engaged in a real concrete level, and you really have a learning experience,
The League of
is
Women
only
Voters
good
would
for
certainly agree with
democracy.
you.
Well, but in some ways, Bill, the argument is really you three pose more of a threat to a legislator
That's
in
exactly
that sense,
right.
because you have a much broader exposure.
Right.
So in some ways, that's being diluted in the sense that it's only a district person, now it's only from 5 towns or whatever.
I think that this is a philosophical rather than
It
a
is.
practical
It is.
argument.
But
But I still think it exists.
There are some sort of detail-oriented questions in here, because you have to sort of be careful about, is it a new district? Well, if it's a new district, it's going to pose challenges for the town, because it's the towns who conduct the elections, not the county. We don't have an election department. So you have to model it sort of so that you take into consideration town wards, otherwise you're going to create your own sort of election issues.
Well, that brings up
Well,
the
but that's-
question I
that's
raised
again
before.
the
Is this
details.
a charter issue? Can we do
It
this
definitely
with
is a
charter?
legislative issue. This
Right.
definitely needs legislation,
Oh, yeah,
because
definitely.
you're creating, they're not special purpose districts, but a new county commissioner district that would be for an elected purpose.
The last time we had a countywide referendum to get a charter change, it passed in the county by 75%, and then it sat on somebody's shelf, and I believe we have to go through the process of reintroducing it, probably, if we have these changes. I have no evidence, based upon experience, that the legislative branch is supportive of any changes that we want to make, unless we're all in agreement, unless we have some
Well,
evidence that we have.
It would be
absolutely
very
no-
unwise on our part if we proposed anything in terms of legislative effort that we already knew did not have support of the legislative delegation from Cape Cod. I mean, we'd be whistling in the wind.
Right.
Because if they didn't support what we were doing, what's the point in doing that? You know, so that we have to engage them in this process. And we talked about it at the last Cape and Island Selectmen's meeting when, well, Sarah Peak was there, and I think one other legislator. And it was very true. I mean, if they're not going to support it, it won't go anywhere.
Then
So it
should we
has to
have this
have,
conversation with them then, as far as what the other leaders on Cape Cod have to say with regard to the things we're proposing?
I think you sort of have to, I think that's a good idea, yes, I think.
well,
You should, eventually you want to
process.
say,
Eventually
you know,
you
what
would,
do you
we
think?
have to get our own
That's
thoughts
what I
together
was gonna
first
say,
and
yeah.
get a little more detail into what we really want to consider before we engage.
Yeah, I think you
There's
need
a
to give them
certain
something
point
concrete.
we have to
to say,
give
what do
them
you think
something
about
in
this?
writing, something concrete, that this is what we're looking at. And we would want their support in that.
The overall issue for me is, in what we're talking about creating, there is a system of checks and balances that exist under the present system. The specific reason for the assembly being created was to create a check on the, specifically, I think on the Cape Cod Commission, as well as looking at the budget issues with regard to what the county was spending. And indeed, they carry that out through, both through the audit and through the budget process, which we're going on now.
Right.
So the question becomes, is what we're proposing, or what we're talking about now, is that going to create a stronger or a weaker sense of representation? I'm talking about sense, not in substance. And how do we may believe that would happen, but I just have some serious reservations about whether by replacing what we have, that are we going to create something better, or something that might be looked at as, let's say, supporting the needs of the development community? In other words, it's easier for things to get done in Cape Cod because this serves the needs, this serves the interests of the business community, without looking at what the constituents believe is in their best interest.
I wouldn't
I don't
characterize it
believe
that
that.
way, Bill,
Yeah.
but there is a risk. I agree, I sort of agree with Bill, that, and that's sort of what I was saying before about the strengths and weaknesses about the Assembly of Delegates, is the strength and the weakness is, in my mind, pretty equivalent, and that's the linkage to the towns. You have sort of a direct linkage to the towns are engaged with what you do. Does that, in my mind, prohibit you from doing things sometimes on a more regional basis? Yeah, I think it does. Sometimes there's a parochial focus on the town borders, and that's the way it is. You hear it, you just said that. And that's sort of the beauty of this new system, is you sort of take that away. Now you have districts, so you have some regional approaches even within the Cape, but do you lose engagement with the community when you do that? That's a risk, yes. But that's up to sort of the strength, and you have to have confidence that the district person or the district electorate will elect a good person who won't let that engagement dissipate. And that's what you have to have the confidence in. If you're going this route, if you want to go this route.
You know, there's people here who've served on the, assembly for a number of years, and people who might have something, I'd love to hear from
Anybody want
what
to
the
comment on
assembly,
this?
we have 2 assembly members current, we have a former assembly member here. I would love to.
Okay, Lou, I can't
Yeah,
believe you
Mary
don't
Lou,
have
come on,
anything to
Mary
say.
Lou.
Come on.
You can't believe that. Well, I just want to just say at the very beginning that the idea and the purpose of the special commission was not because we thought we had a bad county, or that it was disorganized, or that it wasn't providing good services. It was, we have a county that's always, the audit, great bond ratings. I think we have great employees. I think we have great departments. We provide excellent services. We were one of the few counties left in the Commonwealth, and people came out when it was threatened to save this county in great numbers. I was one of them. So I don't think this was done from a point of view that we have a bad county. I regret that some of the responses I've heard to commission recommendations show such a lack of vision. They're immediate no, or, well, they just made up problems so they could come up with a solution. It doesn't show any thinking at all. It just shows gut reaction to change, which I am disappointed in, but it's not unexpected. So that was the number one thing. The thing I think you're sort of overlooking a bit is we did this because of the challenges of the future. And the challenges of the future are not just, they're facing the country, and it's the need for more collaboration, the need for more coordination, the technology needs that we can just begin to see are affecting everybody. They're going to be so great that we can't even envision what they might be. Mm-hmm. And we're seeing it already. It's beyond me already. Well, it was a long time ago, but it's so making a change in the landscape. And that means a change in government. We wouldn't be having this discussion, which I think is essential at this time in our history, if there hadn't been a push. Wouldn't have happened at the assembly. They have 2 hours and they don't get deep into discussion on any one issue. So that wouldn't have happened there. It wasn't happening. So we had a special commission formed of great diversity, really. You had environmentalists, you had business people, you had government people, you had nonprofit organizations, I think, and you had different political points of view. I think it was amazing that that group came together the way it did. Now, I think you should question very much the recommendations, but please, I hope everybody does it, not just with a decision in their mind already. I'm not going to buy that, but with an open mind. That may be too much to hope for from some people, but the recommendations that were made were for a strong executive, not a manager, an executive who would be more than just a spokesperson for this county, but would be that. We don't have that now. When we want to hear something from the county, what does the county think about this? Which one of you do we go to? Who do you go to from the assembly? I chaired I established a Lower Cape Community Coalition when I first came to the Cape. 8 towns. They were upset because they said the Upper Cape didn't do anything for the Lower Cape. So we got 8 towns together. They were a much stronger voice as 8 towns than they had been as each town in the Lower Cape. Now that's going to be a hard sell. I've heard it already. We can't give up our rights. Well, you have 2% of the vote that has to go over a couple of the bigger towns and all that. You really have to be very, very united. And on many regional issues, the assembly is not. We haven't passed some regional issues because of a parochial point of view. But I think you can sell, but you're going to have to do that, and that's what concerned me. What is your plan to get the community involved in hearing this, in giving you feedback? That's as important as the plan, if not more important than the plan itself. I think you could have more power, more of a voice, if the Lower Cape towns came together and the upper, and really stress, there are unique and distinct and good differences among the towns, but there are also, more importantly, a sense of unity around them all. And if we're gonna face the challenges of the future, we can't do it with the government that we've got right now. And that's not a negative against any of you, it's reality.
No, I absolutely agree with everything you just said.
I think what's really important about what you said too, is when you look at the way this government is formed now, which are the 3 commissioners who represent the whole Cape, and then you have the Assembly of Delegates where they each represent a town, that already creates a certain conflict. And I don't mean the people, conflict between a commissioner or the commissioners and the members. It's the conflict in the organization that it creates. Because you have one group that's representing all of the Cape, and another group that's representing each of the towns on the Cape. And if the goals are regional services and regional planning, that conflict in the organizational structure doesn't allow for that to work very well. It will work, but it doesn't work very well because people are operating from a totally different set of principles.
But you have to do it and not lose the town identity.
Yes,
and
and that's a
it
very
can be done.
Here's a question I'd like to
Wait a minute,
put
wait
to
a
you.
minute. Wait a second. Mary Lou hasn't finished speaking.
Well, the other thing you've overlooked and you haven't mentioned is that the commission recommended an intermunicipal association, which also is going to be representing each town. In other words, the thought would be that that could be your town administrator. So we've got 15, every town now has a town administrator that I'm aware of. They are very professional people. We had 3 of them on a special commission. Their service was invaluable. I mean, they were just superb in giving advice and supportive. If we brought that group together, and it's recommended in the four times a year for feedback from each town through their professional administrator, let's utilize that great professionalism that's out there and have them also represent each of the towns in bringing back issues, concerns, and problems. So I think we're trying to protect that identity, but I think personally that this plan can be sold as giving each town a better voice than it has now.
We're going to stop for a second.
30 seconds, I'll be right back.